My name is Abby White, and today I'm going to be talking about sex trafficking in the city.
Fun sound. Okay, try to.
Okay, hopefully all of you guys have walked down Chicago Avenue by now, but what you may not know is that there are dozens of massage parlors that are fronts for sex trafficking on Chicago Avenue. It's actually one of the busiest streets for sex trafficking. So what is sex trafficking? As defined by US law, sex trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into commercial sex acts or labor against their will. Some statistics that I found were that 24,000 women are involved in sex trafficking in Chicagoland each year, the majority of which are female. 53% are African American and 42% are white. Something that was shocking to me was that the average entry age for a young woman to enter into the forced prostitution is 13 years old.
The International Labour Organization believes there are almost 21 million victims of trafficking around the world. The UN's most recent report found almost half of the victims were forced to work, typically in factories, restaurants and building sites. The majority, 53%, were exploited in the sex industry. 12 countries reported trafficking for organ removal. The rest of the victims were forced into petty crime or begging, or were children thrown into armed conflict. Victims are often trafficked within their own country, but many are taken from poorer countries to more affluent places in Northern America, Europe, and the Middle East. There are still very few convictions for human trafficking. Almost half the countries in the report successfully prosecuted fewer than 10 traffickers.
So that was just a little overview of human trafficking in general, but I'm going to be talking about sex trafficking today. So I wanted to share with you guys, well, first here's a map of sex trafficking and the hot spots that you see in Chicago. It's pretty bad. But I'm going to share a story about a woman named Tanya. Tanya met her trafficker when she was just 13 years old. His name was Eddie, and he was living at the same apartment complex that Tanya and her mom lived in. Tanya was homeless by 15, and Eddie had invited her to move in with him. He eventually started taking her to parties surrounded by men, drugs, and alcohol. And he convinced her one time that if she loved him, she would sleep with this one man for money, for them to be able to save up. And then he continued to say this. Eddie became aggressive and would use violence to get her to stay. Tanya truly believed that she deserved the abuse she was receiving because of the manipulation. She eventually was saved after the police received an anonymous tip about Eddie and his suspicious activities. But unfortunately, the way in which Tanya was manipulated into prostitution is very common among young women being trafficked. The AMP model stands for action, means, and purpose. So in the action section of this, traffickers recruit, induce, provide, transport, harbor, and obtain victims. The means by which they do so are by force, fraud, or coercion. And the purpose is for commercial sex or sex trafficking or labor services. The action. This is where traffickers build trust with the victim. As crazy as it sounds, sex trafficking does not always happen the way that we may envision it. Oftentimes, we picture a violent kidnapping, a trafficker intensely stalking his victim for days before plucking her from the streets and shoving her in a damp, dark room. Although this does happen, it's quite rare in comparison to how it usually happens. In reality, the victim almost always knows, trusts, and even loves their trafficker. Traffickers can be a family member or a family friend. They prey on young women who are emotionally vulnerable or have a need that needs to be filled. This is because many women who are forced into the industry are seeking emotional support and love. They usually come from broken homes and have been abused before. These women also have physical needs that need to be met, like a safe place to live, since many of these young women are runaways, and financial support. Traffickers take advantage of this and provide them with these things. They lie to them and tell the women what they want to hear in order to make them fall in love with them. Stockholm syndrome sets in, which is when the victim is manipulated into having positive feelings towards their abuser. Traffickers make victims feel loved and make false promises to trap them in a life of forced prostitution, fear, and violence. The means by which they do this are fraud, force, or coercion. The trafficker will tell them that they need more money if they're going to save up and live a happy life together. And it starts by asking them to sleep with one man in order to get some extra cash, and then another, and then another. This is how they are manipulated into prostitution. Traffickers promise more money and love and convince the victim that nobody else in the world but them can love them. The victim is now trapped and feels dependent on their traffickers. So why don't victims just leave? They are usually met with extreme violence and substance abuse addiction. Traffickers will often lace substances with harder drugs to get their victims addicted so they will keep doing sex work in order to get more. They are also threatened by violence if they do not cooperate or follow through, if they complain or try to leave. The traffickers will also threaten their families' lives as well. Many victims struggle with mental illnesses and they truly believe that there's no way out. There are so many massage parlors that are fronts for sex trafficking in the city. In fact, there are 9,000 of them in America that are posing as massage parlors. Some signs that you should be aware of, since we do live in a big city, are massage parlors with boarded up windows and doors, parlors that refuse to serve females, doors that are locked up, if you have to buzz in to get into the store, if the people who work there speak very little to no English, and if the people working there appear to be living in the parlor. So in 2021, there was a mass killing in 3 massage parlors in Atlanta, Georgia. As if the sex trafficking that was happening in these so-called massage parlors isn't horrific enough, at least 8 people were killed in the shootings. A man named Robert Aaron Long was charged with the shootings after being chased down by the cops, and later told them that the reason for the shooting was because he saw the massage parlors as a place of temptation. This entire incident, as tragic as it is, has helped raise awareness for the sex trafficking happening all around America. It serves as a reminder that this is happening in almost every city and could be happening right in your neighborhood. Another interesting thing to note is that the people that are paying for these services are people who have the money to do so. One victim explained that one of her clients was a city judge and another a police officer who would call and warn her when the cops were coming to raid the hotel she worked at. The cycle keeps going because there are always people who are willing to pay for these services. These people are everyday people who we interact with on a daily basis. They are people who look like they have their lives together, who have good and respectable jobs. They're police officers, politicians, celebrities, judges, doctors, all sorts of people who are wealthy enough to pay for these services. It serves as a reminder that not everyone is innocent and that it's happening all around us. And although women do have a way to get out of sex trafficking, it is rare that they try. And the problem is that society has become so desensitized to the violence and so dependent on sex. Americans are the ones who keep the sex slave industry in America running because Americans are the ones paying for it. It is a sick, sick concept to grasp. But there is hope for these women. There are many organizations dedicated to helping get these women out of trafficking, one of them being Naomi's House. This is a faith-based organization that offers programs for hope, healing, and recovery for victims of sex trafficking in Chicago. They provide victims with a safe place to live for up to 12 months as they receive help from expert counselors and staff. They also meet with a mentor from a local church once a month. And Naomi's House teaches women how to safely reintegrate back into society and how to advocate for themselves. They recognize that the women who are seeking help don't have the means to pay for it, so every service they offer is completely free. They provide trauma-informed care, and the staff at Naomi's House are trained to always think about how trauma has rewired the victims' brains so they can properly discipline the women without further traumatizing them. For example, if a woman were to yell at another woman or a staff member at Naomi's House, they wouldn't say, "Hey, you shouldn't be yelling." They would say, "I recognize that you're using your voice to stand up for yourself, and that's great, but let's try and do that in a more loving way next time." So they're really trained to be very cautious in the way they talk to the women in order to not cause any further damage or trauma. There are 2 girls on my floor that there's a PCM at Moody, and they do this PCM where they go walk down Chicago Avenue and they knock on the doors of massage parlors. And so that's kind of where I learned about this whole topic, like in depth. And although it's a heavy PCM, it's very fruitful in knowing that you're being a light to these people. They talk to these women, they ask if they need anything. They give out little bags with makeup wipes or water, anything they might need. And so there are ways that you can help. There are ways that you can talk about it and help people become more aware. And although I don't believe we should be living in constant fear or grief or stress over this situation, I do encourage you the next time you go out to be more mindful and prayerful as you walk down Chicago Avenue. Thank you.